In 1998, a mother and her 5-year-old daughter mysteriously vanished during a picnic in a park in upstate Connecticut. The blanket, the picnic basket, and a pair of child's sandals were found later that afternoon, but of them there was no sign. For 2 years, the case was treated as an unexplained disappearance, until a pink dress emerging from the mud of a river dredged up a truth no one was prepared to face. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're listening from. The autumn sun in Pinewood Creek, Connecticut, filtered through the golden leaves as Robert Caldwell secured the last photo to the wall of his study. His fingers lingered on the glass of the frame, Emma smiling in her favorite pink dress, Caroline beside her, both under the generous shade of an oak tree in Larkin Park. 2 years and 73 days ago, the last photograph. Robert's house, once filled with laughter and the aroma of cinnamon rolls Caroline baked on Sundays, now felt like a museum of frozen memories, a shrine where nothing aged except him. At 42, his dark hair already showed streaks of grey at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, marks left by sleepless nights and choked-back tears. The phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. "Robert, it's Detective Harlow." Robert held his breath. After months without news, Harlow's calls had become as rare as rain in the desert. "Did you find something?" The pause on the other end of the line was almost tangible. "Maybe." A park ranger found a child's dress near the Blackwater River, almost 30 miles from the park. "It's faded, but—" Robert felt his heart accelerate, pounding like a hammer against his ribs. "What color is it?" "Pink." The world seemed to spin in slow motion. Robert vividly remembered that morning. Emma twirling in front of the mirror, enchanted with her new dress. Caroline packing the picnic basket while double-checking she had everything. Crustless peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, Emma's favorite. Fresh strawberries, apple juice. He had stayed behind, deciding to fix the back door hinge. "I'd like you to come identify it," Harlow continued, his voice now softer. "And Robert, don't get your hopes up. It might not mean anything, but for Robert it was everything. It was the first concrete lead in 2 years of fruitless searches, discarded theories, and false hopes. 20 minutes later, he was at the police department. The dress lay spread out on a table, protected by plastic. It was too small, too fragile to have withstood so long in the water. The pink had faded to a pale, almost ghostly hue, and mud stains marred the fabric. But the embroidered little butterflies on the hem were intact. "It's hers," Robert whispered, feeling the air leave his lungs. "Emma wore this the day of the picnic." Detective Harlow, a man with broad shoulders and piercing eyes that carried the weight of too many unsolved cases, nodded gravely. "We're officially reopening the case. We're redirecting the search to the Blackwater River area." "After 2 years?" Robert's voice came out more bitter than he intended. "What do you expect to find now?" Harlow didn't answer immediately, studying the face of the man before him. Robert Caldwell had been thoroughly investigated after the disappearance of his wife and daughter. His life had been turned upside down, his past scrutinized, his alibis repeatedly checked. Suspicion was standard protocol in family disappearance cases, but Robert had been just a victim, a man whose world collapsed on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. "We're pursuing a new lead," Harlow said finally. "A witness has come forward. A woman who lives near the river claims she saw a woman and a child in the area around the time of the disappearance." Robert felt a spark ignite in his chest, that dangerous feeling called hope. "And there's something else," Harlow continued, opening a folder on the table. "We obtained security camera footage from an old bus station near the Blackwater. The recording is low quality, and the date corresponds to 2 days after the disappearance, but—" He turned the folder so Robert could see. In the grainy image, a woman with her head down held the hand of a small child. The woman's face was partially obscured, but something about her posture made Robert's heart skip a beat. Could it be Caroline? "We can't confirm for sure," Harlow replied cautiously. "But what's more interesting is this." He pointed to a tall man beside them, his face turned away from the camera. "He appears in several images, always near the two." Robert studied the figure, broad shoulders, rigid posture, dark hair cut too short to be noticeable from a distance. He didn't recognize the man, but he felt a chill run down his spine. "Who is he?" "We don't know yet, but we believe he may be the key to understanding what happened that day." Back in his empty house, Robert couldn't sleep. Harlow's words echoed in his mind, mingling with memories of that last day. Caroline had called in the afternoon saying they'd be back a little later because Emma was having so much fun. Her voice sounded normal, maybe a little rushed, but nothing that would have triggered an alarm. Now, 2 years later, he wondered if he had missed something. A tone, a hesitation, a disguised plea for help that he hadn't caught. In the living room, the wall covered with clippings, photos and maps, his own investigation board, seemed to mock him. The more he looked at the connections he had drawn, the theories he had developed, the more he realized he was chasing ghosts. The phone rang again, jolting him from his somber thoughts. He didn't recognize the number. "Mr. Caldwell?" A female voice, hesitant. "My name is Marlene Winters. I think I saw your wife and daughter 2 years ago." Robert felt his blood run cold. "How did you get my number?" "The detective gave it to me. He said I should speak directly to you." She paused. "I live near the Blackwater River. I have a small farm. I don't usually get involved in other people's business, but when I saw the news about the pink dress—" "What exactly did you see?" Robert tried to stay calm, but his hands were trembling. "A woman and a girl with a man. They passed by the road near my property. The girl was wearing a pink dress. She looked scared." "When was this?" 2 days after the disappearance, I believe. I remember because there was a bad storm that night. The man, he was driving a dark blue pickup truck, an older model. They seemed to be heading towards the mountains." Robert felt a pang of anger. "Why didn't you report this before?" The silence on the other end of the line was stifling. I was afraid. The man seemed to notice me watching. He looked right at me, and there was something in his eyes." She took a deep breath. "Besides, at the time the search was focused on the park and surrounding areas. No one asked anything around here." "What did this man look like?" "Tall, strong, dark, short hair. He had a scar on the right side of his face near his eye, and he was wearing a uniform. Looked like a guard or something." Robert's breath caught in his throat. A uniform. Could he be a park ranger? Someone with free access to the parks and forests in the region? Someone who knew every trail, every isolated cabin, every perfect hiding place? "Mrs. Winters, I need you to tell me exactly where they were going." "There's a road that goes up into the mountains, passes by some isolated cabins. It leads to a remote area we call Silent Valley. Very few people live there, especially in the winter." Robert jotted everything down quickly, his mind already tracing the route. "I'll report this to Detective Harlow. Thank you." After hanging up, instead of calling Harlow, Robert grabbed his coat. He had waited 2 years for a concrete lead. He wouldn't wait another minute. As he drove through the darkness, towards the mountains that guarded Silent Valley, Robert didn't know that the river hadn't just returned a pink dress. It had brought to the surface a secret far more complex than he could ever imagine. Silent Valley didn't live up to its name that morning. The wind lashed the trees with unusual fury, creating an unsettling symphony of branches and leaves that sounded like a continuous lament. Robert Caldwell parked his car on the edge of the dirt road, now transformed into mud by the previous night's rain. The surrounding landscape was of a wild and intimidating beauty. Imposing mountains embraced the narrow valley, their elongated shadows covering much of the terrain even during the day. Some sparse cabins dotted the distance, most seemingly abandoned or used only during the summer. Robert consulted the improvised map he had scribbled based on Marlene Winters' information. His gaze fixed on a more distant building, almost hidden by dense vegetation, at the point where the valley narrowed even further. A thin smoke escaped the chimney, rippling against the grey sky. Someone lived there. With his heart pounding against his chest, he grabbed the binoculars from the glove compartment. Adjusting the focus, he saw a rustic log cabin darkened by time. A vehicle covered by a tarp was parked beside it. Impossible to identify if it was the blue pickup truck mentioned by Marlene. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Harlow. "Where the hell are you, Caldwell?" The detective's voice was overflowing with irritation. "Winters called me saying she spoke to you last night." "I'm investigating a lead," Robert replied dryly. "You're not a cop. Get back home right now. We're organizing an official search in Silent Valley with warrants and tactical support." "How long will that take?" "Days. Weeks. My family might be there, Harlow. Right in front of me. And if they are, you could put them at risk by showing up alone. Think, Robert. If this man has kept Caroline and Emma hidden for 2 years, he's not someone you should confront without backup." Harlow's words made sense, but the proximity of the cabin was like a magnet. After 2 years of fruitless searches, of sleepless nights imagining where his wife and daughter might be, of wondering if they were still alive. Being potentially a few hundred yards from them was a temptation impossible to resist. "I'll be waiting at the entrance to the valley," he lied, hanging up before Harlow could argue. Pocketing the phone, Robert started walking, keeping to the edge of the forest to remain hidden. The mud clung to his boots, making each step heavier than the last. But he continued, driven by a determination that bordered on obsession. As he approached, he noticed other details of the property: a small vegetable garden in the back, clothes hanging on an improvised clothesline, a simple swing made of tire and rope hanging from a sturdy tree. A swing. The sight of that innocent object provoked a wave of contradictory emotions. Terror at the possibility of Emma really being there, captive for 2 years. Hope at the idea that she might be alive and relatively well, and an overwhelming fury against whoever had stolen his family. Getting closer, Robert managed to get a partial view of the inside of the cabin through a window. Rustic furniture, a lit fireplace, and on the coffee table, a colorful children's drawing. His heart almost stopped. Emma loved to draw. She spent hours with her crayons, creating imaginary worlds populated by princesses and talking animals. The sound of an engine in the distance alerted him. Instinctively, Robert hid behind a wide tree. A dark blue pickup truck, old and with the body dented in places, approached along the dirt road. The vehicle stopped in front of the cabin. A tall man got out, carrying grocery bags. Robert squinted, trying to see better. Dark, short hair, broad shoulders, and when the man turned his face for a moment, the scar near his right eye, exactly as Marlene had described. Robert felt his blood boil. There he was, the man who possibly had stolen his family, his life, his peace. The impulse to advance, to confront him immediately, was almost irresistible. His muscles tensed, ready for attack. But then, the door to the cabin opened. A girl of about 7 years old came running out, her blonde hair shining even under the diffused light of the cloudy day. She wore simple clothes, jeans, a red sweater too big for her small body, but her face, it was Emma. His Emma. Older, taller, but undoubtedly his daughter. "Did you bring chocolate?" The child's voice carried a familiarity that hit Robert like a punch. "You promised," the man smiled, a surprisingly gentle smile. "Of course, princess. It's in the blue bag." Emma grabbed the bag mentioned, her expression lighting up with childish excitement. She didn't look like a terrified or abused child. She looked comfortable, almost happy. And then another figure appeared in the doorway. Caroline. Robert had to cover his mouth with his hand to stifle a sound that threatened to escape. Half sob, half scream. His wife was thinner, with longer hair than he had ever seen her with, but it was her, alive, standing, seemingly unharmed. Something was deeply wrong. Caroline smiled at the man, a cautious but genuine smile. "Did you get everything on the list?" "Everything except the antibiotics. The pharmacist said we'd need a prescription." The man lowered his voice. I think he was suspicious. Caroline's face tightened with concern. "Emma's cough is getting worse, Ray. She needs proper medication." Ray, now the kidnapper had a name, approached Caroline, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know that. I'll try another pharmacy tomorrow in Greenvale. It's further away, but no one knows me there." Caroline nodded, her gaze briefly meeting his before turning to Emma, who had already found the chocolate bar and was devouring it with childish enthusiasm. The scene was surreal. There were no visible chains, no weapons pointed to force them to cooperate. Caroline didn't look like a terrified prisoner, but a woman concerned about her daughter's health, talking to, with whom? A captor, a companion. Robert's mind refused to process what he saw. It defied everything he had imagined for the past 2 years. In his worst nightmares, he had seen them dead. In his most hopeful moments, he imagined them held in captivity against their will, waiting for rescue. He never considered this. As he watched, Emma noticed something in the forest, a squirrel or a bird, and started running in Robert's direction. He recoiled instinctively, but his foot broke a dry branch with an audible snap. Emma stopped abruptly. "There's someone there," she announced, pointing to where Robert was hiding. Ray immediately went on alert, his body assuming a defensive posture. "Emma, get back inside, now." The girl hesitated, childish curiosity battling against the authority of the command. "Emma," Caroline's voice had urgency. "Do what Ray says. Go inside." To Robert's horror, Caroline quickly went into the cabin, pulling Emma with her, while Ray headed with determined steps into the forest, directly to where Robert was hiding. With no option, Robert came out of his hiding place, revealing himself. The shock on Ray's face quickly gave way to an expression that mixed fear and fury. "Who are you?" demanded Ray, his hand instinctively moving to his belt, where Robert glimpsed the handle of a knife. "I'm Robert Caldwell," he replied, keeping his voice steady despite the turmoil of emotions. "I'm Caroline's husband and Emma's father." Ray's face paled. For a moment it seemed he would draw the knife, but then his shoulders slumped slightly. "I knew this day would come," he murmured, more to himself than to Robert. "I just didn't expect it to be so soon." "Where's your uniform, guard?" Robert asked, unable to contain the bitter sarcasm. "Or do you only wear it when you're kidnapping families in parks?" Ray frowned, confused. "Uniform? I don't know what you're talking about. I never—" "Ray!" Caroline's scream interrupted whatever he was going to say. She was at the door of the cabin, her face a mask of shock and fear. "It's Robert. Oh my God, it's Robert!" Before either of the men could react, Caroline ran towards them, her eyes fixed on Robert as if he were an apparition. "Caroline," Robert's voice failed. "What's going on here? Why are you—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Caroline had thrown herself into his arms, sobbing so hard that her entire body trembled. "You're alive," she repeated between sobs. "You're alive." Robert, stunned, looked over Caroline's shoulder at Ray, who watched the scene with an indescribable expression. Not that of a discovered kidnapper, but that of a man witnessing the end of something precious. "Dad." A hesitant little voice made everyone turn. Emma was standing a few feet away. Her big blue eyes, the same eyes as Robert's, widened with confusion and something else. Recognition. "Emma," was all Robert could say, his voice barely a whisper. The girl looked at Caroline as if seeking confirmation. "Is that him, Mommy? Is he really the daddy from the stories?" "From the stories." The words hit Robert like a physical blow. Caroline nodded, tears still streaming down her face. "Yes, honey, he's your father." Emma took a hesitant step in their direction, then another. She seemed to be examining every detail of Robert's face, comparing it with some mental image. "But you said Daddy was dead," Emma said finally, her small voice laden with confusion. Robert's world collapsed for the second time. Sitting at the rustic table in the cabin, Robert watched Caroline make tea with automatic movements, as if she needed to keep her hands busy to avoid collapsing. Emma had been gently persuaded to go to the room with a storybook, although Robert could feel the girl's curious gaze every time she peeked through the half-open door. Ray remained standing near the window, his tense posture indicating that he was ready for anything, flight, fight, or something in between. "Why did you tell her I was dead?" Robert's voice was low, controlled, but laden with a pain so deep that it made Caroline shudder. She placed a steaming cup in front of him, then sat down, her hands trembling slightly. "Because I believed it," she answered finally. "Because I saw you die." Robert frowned. "What are you talking about?" Caroline took a deep breath, looking briefly at Ray as if seeking strength. "That day in the park, do you remember having an argument with a man the week before, in the supermarket parking lot?" Robert thought for a moment. "Yeah, a guy cut me off and almost hit the car. We exchanged some words, nothing much." "It was more than that," Caroline continued. "The man was Vernon Slater. He worked at your company, was fired 6 months earlier for theft. You didn't recognize him, but he certainly recognized you." Robert tried to recall the man's face, but the memory was hazy, only the recollection of a heated argument over a parking spot. "He followed us to the park that Saturday," Caroline continued, her voice growing more fragile. "While Emma was playing near the lake, he approached me, showed me a gun, and said that you had ruined his life. He said he was going to get revenge by taking everything you loved." The air seemed to vanish from Robert's lungs. "Why did you never tell me anything about this man?" "Because you were already too stressed with work, always protecting everyone, always carrying the world on your shoulders." Caroline smiled sadly. "I thought I could handle it myself." "What happened next?" "He forced me to call you, to say that we'd be staying longer at the park. He wanted you to come, and then—" her voice failed. "You showed up, sooner than we expected. I saw you getting out of the car looking for us. Slater fired, I saw you fall, there was so much blood." Robert instinctively brought his hand to the left side of his chest, where a thin scar marked his skin, the result of emergency surgery to remove a bullet that had pierced his lung and nearly struck his heart. I didn't die, he said softly. I was in a coma for 3 days, but I survived. Caroline covered her face with her hands. He dragged me away before I could check. He said that if I screamed, he'd kill Emma too. He put us in his car and drove for hours, all the time repeating that you were dead, that the police would think I had shot you and run away, that we could never go back. And Emma's dress? How did it end up in the river? Emma was so scared. She wet her dress. Slater made us stop near the river so I could clean her up. I put the dress out to dry on a branch while I dressed her in clothes he had bought. When we got back to the car, I forgot the dress. It was an accident, but later I thought maybe someone would find it, that it could be a clue. Robert tried to process everything, connecting the dots. And then, Slater kept us moving for days. Cheap motels, always paying in cash, until we got to an abandoned house near Red Creek. He planned to keep us there, but he was getting paranoid, drinking a lot. Her gaze met Ray's. That's when Ray found us. Ray stepped forward, speaking for the first time since they entered the cabin. I was hunting, he explained. I heard screams. When I got closer, I saw Slater dragging Emma by the arm while she was crying. Caroline tried to intervene, but he pushed her hard. Ray confronted Slater, Caroline continued. There was a fight. Slater had a gun, but Ray managed to disarm him. Then, I killed him, completed Ray, his voice steady despite the weight of the confession. It wasn't intentional. We were fighting, rolling on the ground. The gun went off. The silence that followed was almost palpable. Robert looked from Ray to Caroline, trying to absorb this new twist. Why didn't you go to the police after that? Because I still believed you were dead, Caroline replied, tears streaming silently down her face. And I was sure I'd be charged with your murder, that they'd take Emma away from me. Ray offered a place for us to stay while we decided what to do. But days turned into weeks, continued Ray. And weeks turned into months. Emma was traumatized. She wouldn't talk. Caroline was devastated. I couldn't just abandon them. Robert observed the man who, during the last hours, had gone from a monstrous kidnapper to something much more complex in his mind. You never tried to find out what really happened to me. Never checked the news. Ray averted his gaze. In the beginning, yes. But here we don't have television. Just an old radio. The newspapers rarely come. And with time, he hesitated. With time, you became attached to my family, Robert completed, a new wave of anger threatening to emerge. It wasn't like that, Caroline intervened. Ray saved our lives. He took care of us when we thought we had no one left. He never forced us to stay. He never hurt us. But you allowed my daughter to grow up believing I was dead. Robert's voice finally rose, laden with pain and indignation. Caroline cringed as if the words were physical blows. Because I believed it. And then it became increasingly difficult to imagine another truth. How would I explain it to her? How would I explain to myself why I never checked? Why I never went back to be sure? The silence that followed was interrupted by a small voice from the door. Is Mommy crying? Emma was standing at the entrance to the kitchen, hugging a worn teddy bear that Robert didn't recognize. Her blue eyes, so like his, were widened with worry. Caroline quickly wiped away the tears. I'm okay, sweetie. These are happy tears because your dad is here. Emma looked at Robert with cautious curiosity. You're really not dead? The innocent question broke something inside Robert. No, Emma, I was very hurt, but I didn't die, and I spent every day since then looking for you and your mum. The girl processed the information with surprising seriousness for her age. Like in the stories Mommy tells, about the king who crossed oceans looking for his queen and princess. Robert looked at Caroline, who lowered her eyes, embarrassed and touched at the same time. Yes, he replied softly. Exactly like those stories. Emma took another step towards him, still hugging the bear. Can Uncle Ray also come with us when we go back to the castle? The innocent question crystallized the complexity of the situation. Robert looked at Ray, who remained motionless, his face a mask of resignation. Emma, Caroline called gently. How about showing your dad that drawing you made yesterday? The one of the squirrel family? As Emma ran to get the drawing, Robert's gaze met Ray's. You killed a man, he said quietly. Even if it was in self-defense, you hid the body and kept my family away from me for 2 years. I know, Ray answered simply, and I'll answer for it. Ray, Caroline's voice trembled. You don't have to. I do, he interrupted gently. I always knew this day would come, Caroline, from the beginning. The sound of lively footsteps announced Emma's return. proudly holding a sheet of paper covered with colorful drawings. "Look, Daddy, this is the squirrel family that lives in the big tree." Robert took the drawing, his heart constricting as he saw the signature in the corner. Emma C. With the C carefully drawn, exactly as he had taught her when she was just 4 years old. "It's beautiful, Emma," he managed to say, despite the lump in his throat. As Emma excitedly explained every detail of the drawing, Robert felt the weight of the choices he would need to make. The revenge he had imagined against his family's kidnapper now seemed empty in the face of the much more complex reality he had found. The rain began to fall outside, the sound of the drops against the roof creating a melancholic melody that seemed to accompany the tension inside the cabin. It was then that the noise of approaching vehicles cut through the moment. Headlights illuminated the windows and voices commanding attention echoed outside. "Connecticut State Police, come out with your hands up." Ray looked out the window, and then at Robert. "You called them?" "No," Robert answered honestly, "but they knew I was coming here." Caroline grabbed Emma quickly, pulling her away from the windows. "What's going to happen now?" she asked, the fear evident in her voice. Robert looked at his wife, at the daughter who barely knew him, and at the man who, paradoxically, had both saved and separated his family. "The truth," he answered finally. "Whatever happens, the truth needs to come out." Ray nodded, a silent acceptance in his gaze. "Take care of them," he said simply before heading to the door. "Wait," Robert called. Ray stopped, turning around. "I'll go with you. We'll explain together." Outside, Detective Harlow commanded a tactical team, weapons in hand, pointed at the cabin. When the door opened, revealing Ray, followed by Robert, the tension was palpable in the damp air. "Hands up, don't move!" shouted Harlow. "It's okay, Detective," said Robert, keeping his hands visible. "My wife and daughter are here. They're alive and safe, but the story is much more complicated than we imagined. During the hours that followed, the truth was revealed in layers. Vernon Slater's attack, the fight that resulted in his death, the 2 years of isolation based on a terrible misunderstanding." At the police station, while giving her statement, Caroline held Robert's hand as if she feared he might disappear at any moment. Emma slept exhausted on an improvised sofa, oblivious to the legal drama that was unfolding. Ray was detained, but the mitigating circumstances, self-defense, the rescue of a threatened woman and child, the absence of any physical restraint or abuse during the time they were with him, weighed in his favor. "What happens now?" asked Caroline when they were finally released to go temporarily to a nearby hotel. Robert looked at Emma asleep in his arms, his daughter, who knew him only through fanciful stories, who would have to relearn to love him, to trust him. "Now we start again," he answered softly, "one day at a time." 6 months later, Robert watched Emma playing in the backyard of the house they had bought near Hartford. It wasn't the same house where they had lived before, that one carried too many memories, too many ghosts. This was a fresh start. Caroline approached, offering him a cup of coffee. "She asked about Ray today," she commented, sitting beside him on the garden bench. "She wants to know when he'll be able to visit her." Robert nodded. The weeks of family therapy had helped everyone process the trauma, the separation, the complexity of their feelings. Emma still had occasional nightmares, and Caroline still struggled with the guilt for not having checked if Robert had really died. As for him, he had learned to accept that his family had been changed irrevocably by the events of the past years, not just broken, but reconfigured. "I spoke with the lawyer yesterday," said Robert. "Considering all the circumstances, they're offering Ray a deal, involuntary manslaughter, with the possibility of parole in 5 years. Caroline absorbed the information in silence. Her relationship with Ray was a wound that still needed to heal completely between her and Robert. It hadn't been romantic. They both insisted on it, and Robert believed them, but it had been deep, forged in trauma and survival. "Will we visit him?" she asked finally. Robert took a deep breath, looking at Emma, who was now chasing butterflies with the carelessness that only children can maintain. "Yes, I think we should. For Emma, and," he hesitated, "maybe for all of us." Caroline rested her head on his shoulder, a gesture of intimacy that had become more frequent in recent weeks. "I still wonder how it would have been if we had checked the news, if we had found out that you were alive. 2 years, Robert. We lost 2 years. We didn't lose them," he corrected gently. "They were difficult, painful years, but you were still living, breathing, hoping. Emma grew. You survived, and I never gave up looking for you. On the horizon, Dark clouds announced an approaching storm. Emma, noticing the change in the weather, ran to them. "It's going to rain," she announced with the peculiar wisdom of children. "Can we make hot chocolate?" Robert smiled, still marveling at each new interaction, each small moment regained with his daughter. "Of course we can. Let's go inside." As they walked into the house, the first drops began to fall. Robert thought of the Blackwater River, of how a small pink dress had been carried by the current until it got caught on an abandoned tire, revealing a truth that no one expected. Some truths, like water, always find a way to surface, no matter how long it takes. That night, when Emma finally fell asleep, Robert found Caroline looking out the window, watching the rain. "Do you think we'll ever be completely happy again?" she asked without taking her eyes off the storm. Robert approached, hugging her from behind. "I think we'll be different. Happiness will be different too, but yes, we'll be happy." Caroline turned in his arms, looking at him with eyes that had seen too much, felt too much. "Promise?" Instead of answering with words, Robert kissed her softly. The kiss tasted of promise, of forgiveness, of a future that, although uncertain, belonged to them. From the next room, the soft sound of Emma's sleeping breath reminded both of them of what really mattered. Not the past they couldn't change, but the present they had recovered, and the future they would build together. The waters of the past had brought to the surface a painful truth, but also a chance for a new beginning. And that, thought Robert as he embraced his wife, was more than many would ever have.